Welcome back to another Wellness Wednesday. I'm Dr. Court, and tonight I have yet another topic that we're going to talk about, and I want to get right into it. So thanks for being here, and so glad to have you. Let's hope that this works the way we need it to. Okay, that's perfect. Great. So tonight, I wanted to share, we're going to talk about raising good kids. Uh, this is not my personal opinion. I just want to make sure everyone is clear on that. While I do try to raise good kids, this is not what I think does it. This is based on a study that came out of Harvard, and they wrote, and these are the results that they came up with. So that's where this is coming from. Put this quote up today just because I felt like it was particularly valuable. Also, Carol Dweck is the leader in resilience research and has done so many studies, written books on, building resiliency and grit. And excuse me, and creating a growth mindset truly is what the core of what she talks about, a growth versus fixed mindset. And I certainly see that in my office where people will come in and they have a really fixed mindset. They don't think that they can change. And I have to tell you, those are my hardest, uh, uh, the hardest people that I face, because it is really hard to help someone get better when they don't want to change, because if you're sick, the only way you get better is if you change, right? Otherwise, you stay sick. So being open to recognizing that things can change, and more than that, but recognizing that you aren't just the culmination of everything that you did yesterday or in the past, but you're also what you can be in the future. So I love what Carol Dweck says here, and talk about parents giving the gift of teaching kids to love being challenged, to have them be curious and intrigued by mistakes. We've talked about this before with growth mindset and creating a safe environment with places like Google, where that's why Google tends to be so innovative, because they celebrate mistakes, recognizing that each mistake is one step closer to a success, right? Even Edison had his famous 999 mistakes or something like that before he finally invented the light bulb. And that the part of this, and I see this a lot in sports, it's not about the win, it's about your effort to get there, right? And any of those folks that have had a big win on the sports field in their life, yeah, it feels really good for a minute, and then the next day is the next day, right? And it almost feels anticlimactic, and that's accurate, because it's really the journey to get there, right? And encouraging kids to keep learning, so important. And that's kind of part of the growth mindset, is that we're always learning, we're always growing. So every time a kid makes a mistake, encourage them, not what's wrong with you or what did you do wrong, but what did you learn from this experience? So I really like leading with that, because I think giving kids that opportunity to recognize they're not the sum of all their mistakes, that these are learning opportunities, can really help kids form confidence and a good core, which can help them be a good kid, right? Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, so bear with me tonight. The other part of why Carol Dweck stresses this is because by doing this, by encouraging them to fail, and encouraging them to learn from their mistakes, for them being curious and intrigued, is one, encouraging them to take risks. So, you're not going to get a big reward without a big risk. It also allows them to not be worried about making a mistake. I see a lot of anxious teens and adolescents in my office because they're so scared of making a mistake that one, they don't take a chance. And second, they get frozen in their anxiety. We don't want that for our kids either, right? So we want to give them the ability to challenge themselves, enjoy the challenge, and to move on. So let's get on with it then. So some things that I want to talk about. I want to first talk about some challenges, right? We want to emphasize that, the goal of parenting is to prepare our children to be good adults, right? Good is such a generic word. What we mean here is that we want our kids to be able to find success, be able to support themselves, to be able to be a productive, contributing member of society, right? To find success in something, to find happiness, right? These are all things we probably wish for our children. And as parents, we're trying to get them there, right? So these Harvard researchers studied some core principles of parenting, and they say it comes down to the few that we're going to go over. And believe me, as a parent, I can relate to the fact that, parenting isn't easy. It's hard work. And we do the best we can with what we have. And so I recognize that, and I applaud you all for parenting and for listening to this, because that means you're trying to be the best parent you can be. And I, again, thank you, because every week I learn about something new, and I'm then able to, try these things out with my kids and try and be a better parent as well. So one thing that's really important with kids, this is not just kids, this is everyone. We are connected. I say this a lot in my office. We are a species that need each other in order to make more of us, right? We can't reproduce individually. We are not amoebas. We can't just split in half. And by virtue of that, by that evidence, you can recognize that we are meant to be part of a group. We're meant to have more than one of us. So we are not individual, even though so much in modern society has individualized us. Yes, there is a uniqueness to every single one of us. However, we're not unicorns that live alone in our own little environment. We are people that are meant to be part of a group. They're meant to be part of a community, a tribe, a pack, and that pack protects us, not just physically, but mentally. And so emphasizing connection and helping kids learn how to make connections is so important. It also creates a level of compassion and empathy with your child, because suddenly when they recognize, I'm going to go into this a little bit later, but when they recognize that they're connected to everyone around them, they suddenly might not be as mean or as cold, right? Imagine a time when you reacted to something or you acted poorly and then you saw your kid get really upset about it. A lot of times for parents, that's a tough moment. I know I've been there. And part of me, some days during that moment, I got a little mad. And luckily, I recognize I'm not really mad at the kid, right, for being upset. I'm mad at myself for acting like a jerk. And I recognize that my actions have consequences, not just to things, but to people. And that if I don't act in a way that's kind and loving, I might not keep that connection with those people. We've also found the connection in research. People that feel more connected have better physical and mental health. Those that don't feel connected, that feel alone in the world, often have a lot of physical ailments, often have a lot of mental health challenges. So being connected isn't just a nice thing, it also helps us stay healthy. So kindness and empathy are one of the things that Harvard came up with. And of course, this is the growing seed. in every kid. We want our kids to get hands-on experience with kindness. It can be a seed that's if nurtured, take care of it, and you actually can use seeds, right? So just planting a plant can help emulate kindness, because you have to take care of the plant. You have to be gentle when moving a plant or taking care of it. You have to water it. You have to think about it, even though it might not be part of your daily routine. And for a lot of plants, they don't produce something that we need or want. And so we have to take care of them just for the sake of taking care of them. And so this can be a really incredible way, especially for young kids, just to experience some sort of connection with something outside of their, outside of their daily routine. Pets are another way that you can teach kindness and empathy, right? Often many pets, certainly dogs always kind of seem to have um, this aura of just loving you no matter what. And uh, pets certainly do in the therapeutic world help people to calm down. There are studies where just petting a dog can help lower your heart rate. Um, and you can tell when you're upset, the pet becomes upset. Treating a pet kindly, or you can tell when you're feeling angry or upset, the pet might feel scared, right? So pets can actually mirror us in a really good way that can help remind us of how to act. Um, Other things that you can do to kind of create kindness and empathy, uh, you can point kindness and empathy out. And one way to do this is to create, and I decided to use a picture here, is a kindness tree. You just glue a little heart by the trunk every time your child does something kind. The way I've done this in the past is I actually write the act in the heart. A lot of schools do this where they catch a child doing something kind and they give them a ticket or a little certificate. I love that because it's reminding kids that being kind isn't just doing something in a vacuum. People do notice, and it really does make a difference. Well, in order for kids to understand what it means to be kind or what it means to be empathetic, you have to model it. So that starts first with you. You have to be kind to yourself. If you are openly using negative self-talk about yourself, or openly criticizing or openly judging or being mean to other people, your kids will mirror that. They will mirror it exactly the same way. If you are using a lot of negative self-talk to yourself, your child will develop that. So, ways to combat that, even if you have that negative self-talk devil, go out and volunteer. Do something where your children can recognize that you're giving something back. And encourage and give children ideas about how they can do something that wasn't asked. And when your child actually does that, don't go overboard, but make a big deal of it. Make sure they're recognized for like, hey, thank you so much for cleaning up. I didn't ask you to do that, and I really appreciated it. And let them know how it impacted you. Not just thanking somebody, but letting them know how it impacted you. It made me feel loved and seen because you cleaned up. And I have to tell you, it also made me realize that you recognize I had a hard day, and I really appreciate that. One other reminder about modeling it's not just about those big acts, it's also about the way we speak. So lead with kind words when you're frustrated at a sporting event or a dance recital or a dance competition or something where, your competitive juices are flowing. You're upset at the ref. Oh my gosh, I see this way too much with parents. Stop yelling at the refs. They're human too. And try to lead with kindness. Like, man, like if the ref does seem to be having a bad day, and you know what, it can be noticed and it does happen. You can say, wow, this ref isn't having a really good day. And um, I I really feel for him or her. Excuse me, speaking of pets and empathy, I need to go let my dog in. Thanks for that. So, so kindness and empathy are the first things that we lead with. And I know this is hard when your kids are acting crazy, or maybe they did something that wasn't nice, or maybe they got hurt by someone that wasn't nice. Something that I've done with my children, I had a couple incidents this year where my children were, I mean, one was definitely a bullying situation. The other one was a bullying incident, but I don't think the kid was a bully. Just think they were trying to exert power in that moment. What I did in one instance, I happened to know the other child that was bullying, and I happened to know a little bit about their family life. So I lucked out in this situation that I could have a little inside information. And what I told my son was, in this case, I knew that child had recently, the parents had gone through a divorce. And the home life, I've worked with a lot of divorcing parents and a lot of kids going through divorces. It's not easy and it impacts everybody. And so I talked to my son about that. I said, hey, what happened wasn't right. What that kid did and said was not okay. However, recognize this kid just maybe even though you're hurt and it felt bad and, you know, it wasn't okay, you can have compassion for someone because oftentimes when people act, right, the quote, hurt people, think about what was hurting them. And I did that with my son and talked a little bit about divorce. And then he talked about a friend that had gone through a divorce and how hard it was on that friend. I said, yeah, so imagine this bully is going through this too. Maybe this bully feels like this is the only space where they're able to exert control. And you just happen to be in the crosshairs that day. And my son took that to heart. And interestingly enough, I don't know what transpired in the classroom between my son and this particular child, but he was never bullied again. So I don't know what happened. I guess what I'm saying here is you have to model it. And so just even talking about how someone who's being mean must have really had a rough day, or wow, that poor ref is having a rough game. We've just got to encourage them because we need refs. Otherwise, no one's gonna, no, we have no one for our game. So we've got to encourage it. So things like that. You want to model kindness and empathy. Another thing that was found was spending quality time together. So I looked up some other research on this, and there was a 2023 study done that found that quality time spent with children was positively correlated to overall child's well-being. I mean, okay, not surprising, right? This is not mind-blowing. However, what does this mean? The overall well-being of the child meant better grades, stronger physical and mental health, and better social connections. And what is quality time? Quality time is not sitting next to your child while you both sit on a screen and, watch independent shows. Quality time is not you're sitting in the same room with the kid, but you're not talking to them. Quality time, I mean, even though in this picture it is a parent and a child, on a piece of technology, they're doing something together. That is so key. And whether it's you're reading a story to your child, or you're doing a puzzle, or you're talking about, you're watching a sporting event, but not just watching it, you have to do something together. You're watching the game and you talk about it, right? You say, wow, I thought this was really cool. Or you're watching a movie and you point out like, whoa, that move is really neat, or I really like how this character is developing, whatever the case may be, you know, interact, interact. and it doesn't have to be for long. There are so many studies that talk about the length of quality time, and that an hour of being in the same room is worth less than 5 minutes of quality time. There's a great story from someone that did a little bit of research on this that I know personally. And the story I remember him telling was that he used to work a lot. This is a person that has started many businesses and very prolific researcher, lots of studies out there, written many books. And so he's busy a lot. And he wasn't home a lot. And what he did though is he would always go into his son's room and he would sit down with his son and he would try and spend 5 or 10 minutes, even if it was late, if his son was still awake, with his son. And he said that, when his son was older, when his son was about 12 or 13, they were talking about vacations or something like that. And the son said, I don't really remember such and such vacation. But I do remember when you were working a lot, I do remember you coming into my room every night and sitting down with me. That is a huge, feather in the cap for that dad. I mean, he recognized that even that little bit of time, and it was focused attention, right? Quality time is focused attention. It is not when you're sitting in a room and you're thinking about something else, or you're reading a book and you focus on your child and doing something with your child. So that can be really helpful. So what are some other ways to spend quality, this focused time? Well, listen. How do you do this? You listen and ask open-ended questions. When you're forced to do this, it focuses you pretty quickly, because you have to listen enough to be able to ask an open-ended question. Have your child teach you something. Ask them, maybe when if they go to camp in the summer, and a lot of times camps do different craft things, ask them what they learned, and don't just ask them what they learned, go a step further. Say, hey, can you teach me what you learned today? That is really cool. Recognize that how your child learns or what they learned is going to be different, and make note of that. Also, if you do have a busy schedule, your child has a busy schedule. I mean, I know so many parents, myself included, my kids are in a million sports right now, and I feel like I'm always running around. It's the summertime, so we have sports, but then we also have vacations and family visiting and friends visiting and all these things going on, and still trying to make it a fun summer, right? Relaxing summer, right? Anyway, make time that's sacred. So if you have a night during the week where there actually isn't anything scheduled, lock it off and do something focused with your kids. Clear communication is another one that came out of this Harvard researcher study. And if you hear these strange noises in the background, that is my English bulldog. She is snoring as usual. What the Harvard research talked about was clear communication is always important with any relationship, right? That said, they were very specific about the type of communication. Their type of clear communication was, if it matters, say it out loud. In other words, if you notice that your child's doing something you don't want, it matters. And so you have to be explicit and very specific and clear, right? If I'm going to trust you to start going over to your friend's house, down the road, you have to be home by this time, and here's why I want you to do it. And if you are not home by this time, this is the consequence. If you are home by this time, I will continue to trust you, right? Very specific, very clear. What does that do? Well, one, it gives your child boundaries and lanes of the road, which, even though that seems strict, it's actually really helpful for them. They know they will be able to gauge when they're being a good kid or a bad kid, right? Because they will know what rules they're breaking or not breaking. Imagine you're driving down a highway and you have no idea what the speed limit is, or what the speed limit is on this particular road. And a traffic cop pulls up, you see them pulling up. Suddenly you get a little nervous, like, oh gosh, I don't know what the speed limit is on this road, and therefore I don't know if I'm going over the speed limit or not. That's very nerve-wracking. And suddenly you don't know whether this cop is going to pull you over or not. But if you know the speed limit, at least then, while you still might get nervous when you see that traffic cop, because you know you're going over the speed limit, you know you made a choice to go over the speed limit. A little bit different, right? So other ways of making clear communication or having clear communication, and this is something I often notice with families, you know, sometimes we start to have kids and we know we want to have kids, but we don't, there aren't tons of classes on how to be a parent. There's an instruction manual. So we don't sit down, a lot of families don't sit down and go, okay, well, these are going to be our 5 big rules in the house. And this is going to be our schedule every week. Because frankly, as your kids grow and develop, the needs of the family change, the rules change, right? Because kids get older, they can have more responsibility. You don't keep the same set of rules you had for your 3-year-old for your 12-year-old. That said, so things keep changing. So in order to navigate that and to help your kids out, you have to continually communicate with the whole family about your values. Your values probably won't change. And your values are what can dictate the rules of the house. Check in with teachers, coaches, and friends. Not so much of a, trying to get your kid, finding them that they've done something wrong, but more just saying like, hey, I've done this before. My husband can travel a lot. I will actually email the teachers ahead of time and say, hey, my husband's been gone for a couple months for work. So, or he's about to be gone for a couple months for work. I just want to let you know. So if you notice a different behavior, it might be tied to that, and just let me know. That teachers usually say they really appreciate that. It helps put that on their radar, gives them a different perspective on how to approach that child. And then something I do, and I ask so many people that come into my office, is to do a weekly check-in. I actually call it the State of the Union, because I do this with couples as well. And I want you to check in with your union, your partnership with this other person. This is not unique just to people dating or people that are married without kids. This is something you can do with your kids too. I have one client call it the happiest and crappiest, and I love that. And I add something to that. First thing you do is you go over your calendar for the week, the upcoming week. What's going on? Identify it. And as your kids get older and they start to put things on their calendar separate from you, you were the planner for everything for a really long time, and or your spouse was, and now it's, your kids can plan their own stuff. Maybe they're driving or they have friends that drive, they're in high school, they join their own clubs, whatever the case may be. You're really going to want to know what they're doing. So if you're already in the habit of asking what's on everyone's schedule for the week, it's super helpful. I have to tell you, at work, I like to set my week at the beginning of the week. I look at what appointments I have, and it becomes very unnerving when I get last minute appointments if because I've already planned that time to maybe get some research done for Wellness Wednesday or something else. And that kind of changes my whole week. And it definitely throws people off in a parenting setting, right? Because things change, or you don't know where your kid is, they're supposed to be home, and they didn't tell you that they had, they were gonna sit down and work with a teacher to pull their grade up. They didn't tell you about that, or they didn't tell you that their coach wanted to do an extra practice, or whatever the case may be. So knowing this stuff in advance can really alleviate a lot of stress in the household, and it's a really easy way to start. And then it kind of, gets everyone in a decent headspace, and then you can kind of talk about like, okay, what went well this week? That's a really good chance to build connection, right? Because and kind of reward things that you like. So this goes back to values, right? Hey, in this household, we really value being a contributor to the house. And I noticed that, you did all your chores this week without me asking. And that was really awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I don't always want to be the bad guy. I don't always, things like that. And then you also talk about what didn't go well. Hey, when I came home from work on Monday or Sunday, I came home from work on Sunday and you all were home and all the dishes were out and the food was still left out and there were shoes and clothes on the floor. That felt pretty bad. And I felt kind of disrespected because I was at work and you all were home. You had all day to do it and you didn't do it. So I felt like I had to come home and clean up after you. That didn't feel very good, right? So you put it out there and you do it at a time when you're grounded. So here are some of the secrets to this. One, you're teaching your kids how to communicate effectively and without emotion, because you're not talking about this in the moment. This is can be a mistake that a lot of couples make. They get really upset about something like, oh my gosh, we have to solve this problem now. We're really angry at each other and we're going to get through it right now. And if they're not better trained on how to deal with that anger and that emotion in the moment, then they end up yelling at each other, they get really mad at each other, and then they're even more mad and it just gets worse. I tell some couples, hey, table it. And you do this with your kids too, especially if you've noticed a behavior you don't really like, but you don't want them to feel like they're going to the principal's office, like, hey, we have to talk to them. You know that you're going to have this weekly meeting. So you just hold it till then. If it's something that can be held, right? Sometimes there are things that need to be addressed in the moment. I totally get it. But it's something that you can wait on, like, hey, I noticed you haven't been doing your homework when you get home from school lately. And I'm not a fan, right? Our rule was, and so you can do it when you're both grounded, make sure everyone's had something to eat before you do this. Um, and it can work really well. So I think family check-ins are a huge, huge, huge hit to helping develop really clear communication. Problem solving skills. This is another one that the Harvard researchers said that was really important. And this is, yes, we can all develop problem solving skills. Yes, kids in school, that is a lot of what they spend their time doing is problem solving. What this isn't is you solving the problem for your kid. Number one wrong answer. No, you help them with a way to solve the problem. For instance, maybe your child is trying to decide whether to participate in a particular extracurricular activity. And they've done it in the past, they liked it, but they're not sure, and they also want to maybe focus on something else. Maybe they have a new interest they've really gotten into, and now these two things are going to conflict. And before they make the decision, you want them to really think it through. You don't want them to just be like, well, I just want to do this other thing because I'm better at it right now. And that's that, right? So my husband and I actually did this with our daughter. Our daughter is 9. And we had her create a pros and cons list about this one decision she had to make. And it was great. And at first we had to give her a couple of examples, and a couple of her pros and cons were pretty typical 9-year-old, like, she didn't want to do something because it was outside and the weather was bad most of the time when she did it before, or, her friends weren't there or something, or whatever. But eventually she kind of got the idea of what it meant to put a pro or a con down. We talked about how they weren't all equally weighted, and we had her walk through her different lists and kind of star the things that were weighted more heavily, like that meant more to her. And then we talked to her about it. So we taught her a method to make a decision. And in the end, we had to honor her decision, which, was difficult in some ways. However, at least she made the decision very consciously. It wasn't just an emotional, like, well, I'm just going to, I'm mad at whatever. And so I'm not going to do that. Because as you know, kids can change in a blink of an eye. And, one minute they're mad at their coach or their teacher, and the next day they love them. And so you really want to make sure they're making really conscious decisions. Um, so you show them how to work it out. Um, if it's not a decision of like I'm doing this or that, maybe it's a problem that needs to be more deeply solved, or a problem that they don't understand how to solve. You might have to take a step back, help them find where the root of the problem is. um, Maybe going back to the child kid conflicts, like relationship conflicts. If your child is having an issue with somebody else in their class or their team or their troop, um what have you, you can ask them like, okay, well, when did this start? Like kind of be a little bit of a detective and ask open-ended questions again, right? Well, when do you feel like you notice the tension between the two of you the first? They might say, I don't know. You get that a lot, and that's okay. Just encourage them to give the best answer that they have and help them find the root to the problems. Because once you get there, as you know, then it's much easier to solve the problem. Um, And you want to explore the impact of the decisions they make and not just decisions, but their actions have on other people. We want to make sure that we're plugging into your child paying attention to things outside of their direct line of sight and recognize that sometimes people act in a way that might not, their decision might impact somebody else. So maybe if they decide to stay in something, but they're not giving 100%, they're taking a spot away from somebody else, right? That impacts somebody else. This is something as a coach, I say a lot. I'm like, hey, and I tell my parents this ahead of time. I'm like, look, if your child's really not into the game today, I'm not going to play them as much as another kid that's, really wanting to get in there because the kid that's really wanting to get in there is going to give 100%. And I want your child to give when they're ready to give 100%, because if they're not giving 100%, they're taking that spot away from somebody else. And so, it can be things like that. Or if they decide to take something out of their siblings' room, that might impact. This goes back to something I teach my kids about. An apology is more than just saying, I'm sorry. You acknowledge what you did wrong. You acknowledge how what you did impacted the other person. I think this is huge because suddenly they're having to think about what they did and how it impacts someone else, not just sorry, right? And then thirdly, the third part of the apology is what you're going to do to change your behavior so you don't negatively impact that person again. That is a really big one too. And I love that framework for apologies. And I've been trying to teach my kids that. They're not completely there. I'd say I'm not completely there, but we're working on it. Okay, so continuing with the problem solving, I wanted to bring back up growth mindset because growth mindset is so huge in helping uh, kids solve problems. Part of the way you solve problems, right, is curiosity and effort. So praise your child's curiosity and effort, not their, you know, their ability that seems to have been gifted to them, right? Because as you know, for those of you that noticed, I noticed in my childhood, there were kids that seemed to be just super gifted athletes when they were 8. And then they didn't even make the varsity team when they were in high school. What happened? I don't know, but things changed, right? And so I think part of what changed is sometimes kids think, oh, well, I'm just really good at something, they don't work at it anymore. Or maybe they get pushed too hard and they hate it and they stop. Whatever the case may be, things change. And what we are learning more and more, not just inside of our brains, but less of us is as static as we think it is. More of we are way more dynamic and flexible than we think we are. So when you tell your child you're proud of them, tell them that you're proud that they persisted or that they got up after they fell down or that they really put 100% effort in. That is going to teach your child that it's their effort and their ability to be flexible and their ability to get up after they get pushed down. That's something they can repeat, right? But if you just say like, man, I am so proud of how good of a athlete you are, then they're just going to say, oh, I'm a good athlete, right? Which is great to a point. It can help with confidence until something happens where it counters I'm a good athlete, and then their whole world can fall apart. You can talk to a lot of pro athletes that were kind of raised in that, or elite athletes that kind of had that, and then they don't know who they are after that, right? But if they recognize that they were good because they were resilient or that they pushed, they often are able to redirect their efforts to something else and do really well at that too. So you want to welcome, we've talked about this before, part of what growth mindset is welcoming setbacks. And something I say in my house all the time is it's not a failure, it's a learning opportunity. So one of the quotes that I found on something about growth mindset is like, oh dear, you spilled the milk again. What should we do so it doesn't happen tomorrow, right? Back to that apology, like what are you going to do differently so that you don't make that mistake again? That's instead of saying like, oh my gosh, what were you thinking? Right? Or God, you're so clumsy. Can't you pay attention, right? Like now you're judging the person they're already shut down. Okay. One that I really liked was don't set a limit on your child's potential. What I mean by this is, and this can be potential whether it's high or low. This goes back to labeling each other, like, oh, you're such a good athlete, or you're so smart at math. You're such a good artist. You're labeling this child. And even though, and I've done it, I trust me, I've done it a million times, and I try to be better at it. You want to encourage them to say, like, wow, what was it about today's game that, you did really well today. What do you think was different about today's game? They might have to think about it. And if you have them think like that, that's going to have them, because once they figure out like, oh, you know what? Today I did this. And then they know how to repeat the success. So that can be really powerful. And, with, some other things, like maybe it's art, like, wow, like you've brought home all these amazing drawings or paintings or whatever, what is it about this that, you just seem to excel at it? What is this? You're being curious, you're asking them, and they might say, well, I really like my teacher, like it could be things like that. So just try to avoid, whether you say that your kid's gifted or maybe they have a learning challenge or they're beautiful. That's another one, right? Like beauty doesn't last forever. So that's a really tough one to put on somebody. They're going to try and keep it for as long as they can. And, you know, that can be really detrimental to uh, people's core values as they get older. Um, you know, Try to just encourage them in things that are not fixed. So, like saying like, wow, like I appreciate your effort or, things like that. Um, don't play the blame game. Again, going back to the ref situation, I see this a lot. And in a couple instances, I've been, I'm usually a coach, so I'm usually kind of directing kids the whole time, and I'm not paying attention to that stuff. And recently, I have been on the sidelines just as a parent and or an assistant coach where I'm not directing as much. I'm more observing, and wow, parents can be really hard on refs. They can be hard on coaches. They can be hard on other teams. And this blaming, right? What you're doing is you're allowing your child to not own their part. And again, back to the connected thing, that takes away from the connectedness, right? Um, or this could be a judge in another type of competition, or, you know, get rid of the blame game. And not even, just, and that doesn't mean like it all falls on you and it's all your fault. It just means with your child, like, hey, you gave 100% out there. That's awesome. Like I know it's disappointing that you didn't win the competition, or I know you studied really hard for that exam. Like, I'm sorry. Or I know you did a lot of work on this project. I'm sorry your project wasn't picked, you know, instead of saying like, oh, those judges don't know what they're talking about, right? You're putting the control external. And even though that feels good in the moment, it's teaching your child over time they don't have control over their life, and that can be where like anxiety develops, depression develops, because they feel like they lack control. Instead of giving them the control and saying like, hey, well, you came in second, or you didn't do so well on this particular project, like what do you think we could do differently next time? Or, what did you notice about the winning project that was different from yours? Sometimes comparisons aren't good, but sometimes they can help you find the delta and find how to shift, right? So definitely encourage growth mindset type words instead of saying like, I can't do this, or, you know, not good at this yet, right? Or I'm, instead of just saying like, oh, you're so smart, you say things like, you know what? You really know this topic. Like you've clearly spent a lot of time learning about it, right? Or I can tell that you're interested in this topic, right? Because you have so many facts about it. So that can be really helpful for growth. Growth mindset can push problem solving abilities. Another one that they came up with was gratitude and helpfulness. This kind of goes back to the beginning when we're talking about modeling behavior in terms of kindness and empathy. These two are similar. Here's a little slight difference. Again, modeling gratitude. This means asking your kids every day, like, what are 3 things you're grateful for? This can be huge, and creating a routine of this, not just at Thanksgiving, or not just for the month of November, but every day on the way to school, or every night during dinner time, or every night before the kids go to bed. Just ask them, hey, what were you grateful for today? And they might repeat some things, but they might mix it up too. Um, and I want to let you know that expressing gratitude actually changes our brain. I do this a lot with people in my office, in that when you start trying to look for, you're asking your brain, what am I grateful for? Your brain starts looking for it. If you say like, oh man, today was awful, and you just start naming all the things that went poorly, your brain's like, oh, okay, I need to focus on these things that went poorly. Instead, ask like, what are you grateful for? What went well today? Again, those open-ended questions, right? Oh, well, and they might even bring something up, and you can model this, bring something up where you failed or you didn't do what you expected to do, right? Like, oh, I went out for a run today and I really wanted to get, 3 miles in. And I was so tired, I stopped after 2. And while that's disappointing, I'm a little mad at myself, I'm grateful that I got 2 in, right? So now you're kind of changing the dynamic there. And your brain actually shifts when you do this. So there have been lots of studies too that the more you express gratitude and the more you kind of lead with that, those same people that express gratitude more often are considered to be more generous. They're considered to be more compassionate, and they tend to be happier. So encouraging those types of routines and habits can be really powerful for your kids. So, okay, let's talk about other types of emotions. So we talk about gratitude, which can be really powerful. We also want to make sure that we're helping our children navigate the ability to care for themselves, and also recognizing that when you sometimes have to care for other people, it can feel overwhelming. And sometimes when you're trying to be kind to someone else, or you're trying to be, a caring, a good friend, but your friend's in a really bad place, you might get angry, you might feel shameful, you might feel guilty that you're not doing enough. And you want to acknowledge all of those feelings. All of those feelings are valid. And one of the best things you can do is try and think of a time when you felt those feelings. Say, "Oh, when I was feeling really guilty about not going up to see grandma and grandpa, that guilt, while not a good feeling, it forced me to pick up the phone, and I called them and I talked to them. And even though that wasn't as good as seeing them in person, you know what? I still got to connect with them." So you kind of talk through the emotions, talk to them about how their body feels when they're feeling those emotions, talk to them about what they do when they feel those emotions. That can be really helpful, and you're helping your kid build a vocabulary, so they can express their emotions better, which means they're going to behave better when they have the emotions, talk through what's socially acceptable when they have certain types of emotions, right? So you're angry and you punch something. Is that socially acceptable? Not really, right? Like, that's not wrong answer, right? You're angry. Maybe you can excuse yourself to the bathroom to just go take breaths, splash water on your face, like get yourself away from doing something that you would regret, right? And a lot of times this stuff happens when a child feels overwhelmed. And there's so much out there today, right? With all the social media stuff, all the tech, kids we are seeing getting so overwhelmed and not knowing how to deal with it. This can happen when a kid gets behind in school. I see that a lot, where they feel really overwhelmed. They've, gotten into some bad habits, and now they're trying to get it back, and they feel overwhelmed because they can't seem to dig out of the hole. Well, remind them that it's the next right thing. So they just have to do the next right thing. So what does that look like? Well, that just means, hey, let's get one assignment done and then the next. And so you reward the little things, like help them feel the success. And then that's going to build up confidence, and that's going to build up momentum. And remember and remind them that you didn't get in this overnight. So it's going to take a while to get out of it. And, just like people losing weight, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And then like, but let them chart their progress, because sometimes you don't realize the progress you're making unless you document it. And that can really help them feel good when they see how far they've come. Other things with navigating emotions, um, might seem a little distant, but if you set clear boundaries and you're consistent about the boundaries that you keep, this is kind of teaching kids what's appropriate. So, in other words, in our house, when we get angry, like it's not okay to yell at each other. So if you do that, because we've all, it's happened, right? If you yell, own it, own it, acknowledge how it probably made the other person feel. How are you going to fix it? Right? Like, how are you going to not do that again? And walk through that process out loud with your kids. That is what's helping them navigate those emotions and can help them be better about it, right? So, like in our house, it's not okay to yell at each other. We treat each other with respect. Okay, well, what does respect look like? Define it. Sometimes we forget that we know these words and know what they look like because of our life experience. But remember, our kids don't have that life experience yet, so we have to define it for them. We have to model it. We have to be really clear in how we explain what we mean by certain things and stay consistent with it. And when you aren't consistent, own it. Say, hey, you know what? This is an off day. Normally I would say this is okay or this isn't, but today it isn't, right? Own when you're not consistent. The last thing that came up was giving kids a bigger picture. This kind of goes back to being connected. It actually is connected to a lot of the other ones. Um, when kids recognize that they're part of something bigger than themselves, it often helps them develop a sense of compassion and empathy, right? Almost all children empathize and care about small circles of family and friends because that's what's around them. And while it feels natural to care about those that are around you, it's also important to care about people that you don't know and about cultures you might not understand, to care about things that are geographically outside your circle. So, what helps kids recognize that or understand the bigger picture? Well, one that's kind of expensive but can be great. You can do it there are ways to do it cheaply, is to travel and travel to places that are different than your own place, right? I was always amazed. I got to live in a few different places, and I actually remember living in this one place, and there were a lot of Americans there that I was working with, and they were all complaining it wasn't like home. Like, well, isn't that the point? Like, we're nowhere near where you came from. And I wouldn't want every place to look just like my home. I want to experience the way other people live. And that helps me connect with people better and makes me more curious. It makes me more open to learning cultures, which makes me more accepted in those other environments. While the people that wanted it to be like home often got angry and upset, ostracized themselves. So you can see how creating this bigger picture can be really helpful. So travel can be really powerful. Parents can also show examples of people exhibiting empathy and kindness. It can be from in the news or, entertainment, and emphasize the importance of being kind to others. Like if there's a famous, Taylor Swift is a big one for kids, right? Well, she donates millions of dollars towards food banks, and she does it, and she often donates a lot of food to local food banks where she's performing her concerts. Bring that up, say like, wow, I learned this about Taylor Swift, like, isn't that cool? Or whatever your kid's favorite, celebrity is. I'm using that one just because that was a fact I remember being like, huh, that's kind of cool. um you know, in order to you want to raise caring, respectful, ethical children, right? So, and that is hard work. In order to do that, you have to walk them through it. Uh, it's something we can all do. And again, you want to practice the impact game. This goes back to the connection again. If I do this, there's this kind of impact, right? If I throw my litter on the ground, there's some great movies out there. There's one about microplastics and plastics and just about how like they can be found in everything. And it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, all these plastics are building up on this island, but then you start to see how those plastics are impacting the people that live on that island, and then how it impacts the animals, and then how it gets back to us and we're finding microplastics in our food, right? So, there's some really cool movies that can be kind of tough to watch sometimes. So like gauge how old your children are and what they're prepared for. But really cool stuff that you can kind of show them to give them a bigger picture of what's going on around them. We're in a year of big political events, and while that's pretty tumultuous, you can just kind of show them little snippets of, well, did you notice how when this person said this, there were all these reactions, right? And that's just a really easy way, regardless of political affiliation, you can see how when someone says something, it creates all these ripples, and you can kind of show how that impacts. Or you can go a step further and say, okay, well, when the US decides to align with X, how does that impact these other countries? You can really get into it. It can be kind of interesting. Maybe you don't always have that kind of time, but at least maybe getting magazines that have world news in them and reading the world news and being curious about it and talking about it can be really amazing, and it helps your kid develop that sense of a bigger picture. So I really hope you enjoyed tonight. I enjoyed reading the Harvard study myself and was excited to share that all with you. I hope to see you again in another Wellness Wednesday. Please tell people about it. Go to our YouTube channel and view other episodes. And if you have ideas about what you want to see for Wellness Wednesday, please, please, please post on Facebook what you want to see, and I'll happily do some research on it and try and bring you the best of what's out there. All right, have a good night.